hearing that your content doesn't quite convert the way it used to. I've been having a lot of DM conversations in the last month or so, and I'm hearing the same thing over and over. I used to make $60, $70, $80,000 per month, and now I can barely make 10 to 15. What is going on? What has changed? Is there something wrong with my marketing? I don't feel like I've changed anything, so I don't get why it doesn't work anymore. If that's you, you're not alone. You didn't suddenly get worse at marketing. The market has just changed. Where in 2020 or 2021, you used to be able to just post a Stripe screenshot and get sales coming in. It's not that easy anymore. And we're going to talk about why. Because what's changed is our society, the economy, the way we view and trust each other. There's been a lot of very massive changes that I think are actually going to be studied for years to come. And I'm doing a podcast episode about this more in depth, kind of breaking down the demise of what I'm calling the COVIDpreneur. These are the people who blew up on TikTok in 2020 and 2021 who were able to make really good money. And it was almost a little bit too easy because everyone was sitting at home scrolling on their phones. They had a stimulus check to spend. It was a very different environment. The economy was a very different environment than it is today. Before, you used to be able to just post some screenshots on your Instagram story of clients who had made a ton of money, or even your own Stripe screenshots, which looking back, this is wild. This is something that is so socially acceptable because in the rest of the world that isn't social media, it's kind of taboo to talk about money and how much you make. I'm not saying that's right. I don't think that it should be taboo to have these types of conversations, but I think that there's kind of a different context around having those conversations with family, friends, people in the workspace, maybe people that you are networking with. I think that's a very different conversation than just putting it up on social media as like the main selling point of working with you. Not to mention, I have to say that the people that are still doing this, you are a walking FTC violation. Like that is kind of scary to me. And we even used to talk more about our business's growth. And I do talk about the lead generation because I think it's important for people to see you walking your talk. It's kind of like how it's kind of hard to be a fitness coach if you don't have a six pack, right? Again, I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. It's just kind of the reality of the situation that we're in. So people want to see proof beyond just clients. They want to see that you're able to do the same thing for yourself. And so sharing different metrics like that around lead flow, that's a way that I've been able to still pull back the curtain and have transparency with my audience so that they can see what is possible, but also to make sure that we're not over promising just because we're talking about our own income. Because our own income, when we're us and we're marketing our own thing that we know inside and out, like that is our best case study. It's everyone's best case study. You are your own best testimonial, especially as a founder-led brand where you're able to tie in your own results, your own transformation, and the things that you've been through. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing that. My point instead is that the way that it's being done is actually breaking trust, I think, for a lot of people. Personally, at this point in my business, I would never invest in a coach or mentor or even a service provider that spends a lot of time talking about their personal income, their own business's revenue. Again, I think it's something interesting to touch on. I think that transparency piece is really interesting for the audience to kind of have a more behind the scenes look. That's something that is interesting and can be valuable to people. But again, when it's your main selling point, when it's I did this, I did that, and it's not even being done in a way that's like showcasing demand or building hype or urgency around your offer because of capacity. It's not even being done in that way. It's just look how much I made. That's where we're starting to see a fall off. And that's what a lot of people have depended on for years. And so now that the market has changed, and we're going to talk more about what that actually means, it's much more difficult for people to create sales because that's all they know how to do. That's the only type of marketing that a lot of these people have learned. And for a lot of them, it's through no fault of their own. It's because they joined programs and they learned from coaches who only knew how to market that way. And so that's what they learned from them, because what we see in the industry is very copy paste marketing tactics. It's be me. This worked for me. Here's what you can do. Again, that's not to say that like we don't take our own data and research and testing into the work that we do for clients, because we absolutely do. But it's not coming from a place of this worked for us, so let's replicate it for you. It's more so here are the principles of what guide success? Here are the patterns that we're recognizing, and how can we leverage those patterns and those principles in your brand in a unique way? Again, people never learned the different intricacies of marketing and the different nuances that actually produce results. And people don't even know why what they were doing was producing results, because all they knew was that if they posted screenshots, they got sales. And now that that's not working, they don't know what to do. Back then, a lot of buyers were much more curious and a lot more impulsive because things weren't as tight and people were blowing up so quickly that it looked so easy and attainable to do that. But now in 2025, there's much greater economic pressure, much greater fear around being burned. So the perceived risk is a lot higher. Obviously, inflation is a big thing that everyone is experiencing right now. Trust is really fractured within our society. If you look at the political polarization, you can see how that trust has been broken down between us on a societal level. Buyers have been scammed, overpromised, underdelivered. Like, that has been a very common thread throughout the past 5 years with a lot of people. And I found that myself, I kind of feel more like a cleanup crew than a marketing strategist, because in a lot of ways, we are constantly playing cleanup for our clients, for the last people that they worked with. Like, it doesn't matter. It can be agencies, it can be coaches. It's like we are having to break all of these bad habits. We're having to really unpack a lot of the fears that are coming up for people when it comes to just making basic decisions within their business. People haven't been taught how to make data-driven decisions, so people only know how to make emotional decisions, and all they know how to do is replicate the last coach that they've had, which is why coach hopping happens so much, is because when somebody can only get you to a certain level by replicating what they've done, and they don't know how to expand beyond that in different industries for different types of businesses with different business models, with different markets, then that's where you start to run into issues. And so we're constantly playing cleanup for clients from past experiences that they've had. And it's such a common thing that comes up in my DM conversations on a daily basis, is people really needing a lot of information to make a purchase decision because they have been burned so many times. It's not even just one bad investment. Oftentimes it's 5 or 6. Sometimes it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that have basically been flushed down the drain. And with the rise of social media, we've seen a real oversaturation of online experts. And this is something that is also feeding into that skepticism. Everyone is claiming results. And something that I even had to learn the hard way was how to do appropriate due diligence when looking into hiring people, both internally within my business, actually hiring people for our team, and hiring outside support experts, consultants, etc. So with this fractured trust within our economy, within our industry, within society, I want to touch a little bit on the psychology behind this shift, because I want you to understand why what you're doing isn't working, and in that, how to move forward and do something different so that your business is able to withstand the test of time. So when the brain goes to make a purchase decision, and this doesn't matter which type of buyer you are, when the brain goes in and decides to make a purchase decision, it's moving in a relatively similar process every single time. And it works like this. You first activate the primal part of the brain. This is the part of your brain that's responsible for survival. It's literally trying to keep you alive. So it's scanning for threats and opportunities. It's trying to relieve pain. It's trying to ensure status. You don't get kicked out of the tribe. It's trying to hoard resources. It's constantly looking for what's in it for me, because it's trying to keep you alive. Your brain is processing 11 million bits of information per second, completely subconsciously. And what you actually consciously think about, the things that you discuss, or the things that you actually discuss or say out loud, or the thoughts that you write down, there's only 40 bits of information that actually makes it through to conscious thought out of 11 million. And so the first step with any good marketing strategy is to know how to create content that's going to activate the primal brain. Because if you're not able to pique that part of the brain's attention, then you don't have the person's attention. So you're not going to be able to sell them anything or market to them at all, because they're not even watching the content. And so this is where your hooks become important, not in the sense of creating virality, but in the sense of creating something that is so targeted to what your audience is experiencing that they feel like you're inside their head. They feel like you were able to voice something for them and articulate an issue that they've been experiencing in a way that they they potentially weren't even able to do themselves. And so this is where content that allows you to connect with specific symptoms comes into play. It's one of those 8 buying triggers, is helping the audience see themselves in your content. You start activating that emotional resonance and you get their brain to understand that this is for me because I am experiencing that thing. That is something that I am actively doing. And the second trigger that's important for the primal brain is speaking to a villain. So providing the brain contrast, another one of those buying triggers. The brain has to have contrast to understand how you're different from other people. And so you have to have something that you stand in opposition to. It's not enough to just tell people what you do and what you stand for. The brain needs to understand what you stand against so that it has that contrast to make a decision. The second phase of decision making is happening in the emotional center of the brain. This is your limbic system. And this is where things like elevating your authority, future pacing, showing people what the desired outcomes are and that you understand what it is that they want, speaking to gaps and mistakes, tapping into identity. These are all of the things that are going to help that emotional part of the brain actually make the decision. This is what I call decision content. And so within this content, because 90% of the decision gets made in the emotional part of the brain, this is where you're doing the majority of your selling. And you're doing it in such a way that people don't realize that they're being sold to. It doesn't feel like you're selling anything at all. In fact, it feels like working with you was completely their idea. Then phase 3 is the justification phase. That's where the rational part of the brain comes into play to try and justify the decision that they already emotionally made. So when you have that knee-jerk reaction and you go click on an ad and you go to the website, that is where the justification phase begins, because you've decided that you might want this thing. Then it's up to you to read reviews, read the product details, really zoom in on those photos and try and justify the purchase to yourself. Think of all of the places that you could wear that bag to. We're calculating cost per use, right? That is where the justification phase is actually coming into play. But the problem is that 2 of those key triggers for the justification phase is results and overcoming objections. And so posting Stripe screenshots or talking about your monetary success is only one of 8 buying triggers. And so previously, you used to be able to trigger that hit of dopamine with the Stripe screenshot and tell them that they could have it too. And that's all the justification that they needed. They're like, oh, it's an investment, it's a great idea, without really looking any further into it. And so when people weren't seeing money as such a scarce resource because the economy was different, inflation was different, they didn't need to spend as much time in that justification phase, and they didn't need as much trust built with you because it was less risky to part with their resource. Now it's a lot riskier to part with your resources, i.e. money. And that is how your brain is thinking about this, because it's trying to keep you alive and it views money as a resource to keep you alive. And so just hitting on that one trigger is not enough to help somebody really lower the perceived risk and be able to make an investment, be able to justify it to themselves. Which is why, once again, the people that are making a lot of money now, currently in this economy, the reason that our content performs and converts so well when people who get 5 or 6 times as many views as I do make maybe 1/10 of the money, because I know how to hit all 8 of those buying triggers within people's brains. I know how to move people from discovery to purchase very quickly. And obviously, that's also what we do in the content that we create for clients. I did an email recently about Alex Hormozi's $100 million book launch, right? And one of the things that I talked about in that email was I basically broke down how he leveraged each of those 8 buying triggers in the live launch webinar he had. And so you can see, even the biggest names in business, they're not relying on brand reputation, on an over inundation of results. They have lots of results. They have lots of testimonials that they can share, but you're not seeing people over indexing that are for a reliance on those results, because they understand what is happening in society and what those patterns are with buyers. They're able to control buying behavior. And even when the economy is doing really well, that's what separates the billion-dollar businesses from everybody else. Even when the economy is doing pretty good and people have extra cash on hand, they're still making sure that they're hitting all 8 of those buying triggers. And so a lot of business owners, they haven't really updated their messaging since 2020, 2021. They're still posting like they're in a high trust market with cash injections being given to the economy at random. And it's why lead flow and applications and sales are much slower for a lot of people. And so what's really working now is creating content that is, instead of of relying on flashy results and dopamine heavy marketing, instead creating a sense of safety with your marketing where they really feel like they can trust you. They really feel supported and seen by you, because that is what they're craving in a time of instability, not flashy results that are high pressure, high excitement. People are craving consistency, stability, safety. And so that's what you want to provide for them with your marketing. And so your tone, even the way you speak in your videos, is going to shift because you want to swing a little bit more towards those warmth cues. Even in the way that you film your content, people need to see you as somebody that's warm and trustworthy more than they need to see that you're highly competent. So a few things that are going to be really impactful for you. I would spend a lot of time on market research, really deeply understanding your audience. What are their fears? What are their concerns? What are the objections that they have? And how can you quell those concerns through your marketing so that you're not having to do it in your sales process? A lot of people are taking much longer to even submit an application than ever before because sales has a bad rap because they view that as something that is a threat to their resource. And so people are a lot more skeptical about getting on a sales call or even submitting an application because they want time to analyze and really make sure that they feel good and justify the decision prior to feeling like they're being pushed in a sales conversation. Now, you still want to be showing proof, but part of that is going to be making sure that you're connecting it to specific symptoms and really pulling back the curtain as to how you provide those results for people. If you're on Zoom calls with your clients, I want to see B-roll of you on your Zoom call with your clients, and I want to see text on screen that explains what you unpacked in that video. I want to see behind the scenes snapshot of advice that you gave to your clients or something that's happening within your community. Let people see what it's like to be inside of your offer. People think that just giving people more information and more results and more how-to tips and tricks is going to convince them that you are so good at what you do that they just have to work with you. And that's not how it works. That's not how the brain works. They need to feel seen and they want to be able to really see what it's going to be like. And so anything that you can show people about what it's like to be in your program, the process, the experience is going to be a lot more activating than just giving results. Make sure that you're overcoming objections within your content. Again, understanding what those fears and questions are and addressing them head on. Don't be afraid to address those concerns head on in your content. It's easiest to do that on Instagram stories. So if you have a hard time filming a reel or creating a post about it, it feels a little awkward, you can start doing that on your stories and pulling back that curtain, which is also great because the people that are watching your stories are typically also the people that are in your DMs. It's just how the algorithm works. So when you have a lot of DM conversations with people, they get served your stories. So when you have objections come up, you can leverage that for content and overcome those objections, and people will be sliding in after you post those stories. And the last thing I'll just tell you is that you do need to be consistent. Not necessarily consistent with like, oh my gosh, you have to post 3 times a day every day, but be consistent with your messaging. Be consistent with the way that you talk about your offers when you do hit home to what you actually do inside of them. Be consistent with the way that you respond, your tone when you're speaking to people in your messages. Be prompt responding to DMs as much as you can. I know it can be hard. My DMs get kind of out of control. Send people voice messages so that they can really understand where you're coming from when you are saying certain things, because our brain picks up on things when we hear people talk that we wouldn't necessarily get from a text. So lean into more personalized elements like that. Lean into longer form content. If you already are creating that type of content, maybe lean into it a little bit more. The more you can do to help people feel seen by you and build that trust, build that emotional resonance, and help them justify the decision, the more money that you're going to make. If this was helpful for you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And like I said, I'm doing a full podcast episode about the death of the COVIDpreneur. People love the podcast. That's the top bit of feedback that I get. So it's called the Social Media Millionaire Podcast, and we'll also have the link to it in the description.